sec before you do that. Oh, too late. Okay, we will carry on, and we'll wish Leon a refuah shalema in public then. Leon's ricked his neck and is not able to be his usual upright self. So we wish him a refuah shalema. He's managed to join us from his sick bed there. So full marks to you, Leon, for attendance at least. We'll have to do our reading ourselves today.
Too much talking yesterday.
Yeah, could be. Right. Okay. So before we start on the Gemarah shiur today, I would just like to share with you a couple of things which are going on in the next, on Shabbat and Motzei Shabbat. So allow me, please, to share this with you. There is a flyer for our new program called Dvar and Dvash. This was started last week. We did our first meeting last week. It is immediately after the Kiddush on Shabbat. And it is a combination of what we normally have in shul, which is the English drasha, and what has been going on at the B building. I'm not allowed to say that B word, but it's been going on at the B building in the past. They have a shiur at that time, an English shiur and a discussion, and it was very popular. But for one reason or another, which we will not go into, they wanted to have a different venue for this project. And so Shoshana Baker approached me and said, how about joining up with our neighbors? And I thought that was a great idea. However, some people that I spoke to did not want to do away with the drasha, which I normally do on a Shabbat after the Kiddush. So we're going to have both of them. Mine will be short, and David Hofstadter, who's going to do it this week. Each week we'll have a different speaker. He's also going to make it a short shiur drasha discussion. And last week, I understand there were about 30 odd people there, and it was very successful. So that's what we're going to be doing, hopefully every week, with a different speaker each week. Anybody who would like to volunteer to speak, I will be very happy to hear from them, and so would Shoshana. So you can contact either of us. So that's this Shabbat. There is a Kiddush this week, sponsored by David and Shoshi Price. And after the Kiddush, we will have Dvar and Dvash. Okay, so that's that. And then Motzei Shabbat, we have this offering, which is another joint venture. Actually, it's not really a joint venture. I was invited by Young Israel of North Netanya to speak on their Melava Malka. And so I decided that we would make it into a joint venture with Tchelet, since I never miss an opportunity to banner the Tchelet. So on Motzei Shabbat at 7:30 p.m., there will be a Zoom Melava Malka, which I will be speaking about Christmas and the Jews, a barometer of society. What I will be talking about is how Jews have related to Christmas over the millennia, and what that tells us about the state of society in general. So that is at 7:30 on Motzei Shabbat. I will be sending out both of those flyers to all the groups. So most of you will probably get it 4 times, but it's better than not getting it at all. And so please join us for both of those programs if you can.
No carol singing, will there be? No carol singing.
Are you offering, Johnny?
No, I've forgotten them. I only know one from school.
You've forgotten the words, have you? Okay,
yeah.
Well, then probably not. There probably won't be carol singing. Although I will be speaking about carol singing, but I won't be demonstrating. Although I can see we've got the Chazan with us today, Stephen. Maybe you want to sing some carols, Stephen, then? Do the Shabbaton choir do carols? No, I don't think the Shabbaton choir do carols. Okay, enough of this nonsense. Let's do some Gemarah. Right. Now, officially, officially, this is the Gemarah Sanhedrin shiur. But today, it is not going to be the Gemarah Sanhedrin shiur. It's going to be the Gemarah Brachot shiur. And the reason for that is we're going to carry on from where we left off last week. Those of you who remember or who had a quick look like I did before we started, we digressed into a Gemarah Brachot for the following reason. In our Gemarah in Sanhedrin 11b, there is a comment that says, come and listen how the haughty ones of an earlier generation behaved and the humble ones of the later generations. And we were talking about Rabban Gamliel and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And we were talking about the dictatorial reign of Rabban Gamliel. And we mentioned in the, so we went off to Gemarah 27b in Brachot to see exactly what was going on. And we found that Rabban Gamliel was deposed as the Nasi because he was too harsh on people. And I told you, we learned last week together the story of the student who came in and asked whether Mariv, Tfilat Arvit, was an obligatory prayer or a compulsory prayer. Rabbi Yehoshua, I think it was, said that it was obligatory. Rabban Gamliel said it was compulsory. And then he humiliated his colleague, and the Sanhedrin had had enough, and they deposed Rabban Gamliel, and they put Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in his place. And I reminded you of the story that you all knew about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah becoming an old man. Overnight. I just want to finish that Gemarah with you very quickly. And then I want to go back a couple of pages in Brachot to tell you the story, to show you the Gemarah, which tells you the story that we alluded to at the beginning of Brachot 27b. So I'm going to share the screen with you right now. And I'm sharing with you 27b in Brachot rather than Sanhedrin. Now, if we get through all of this, we'll go back to Sanhedrin today, but I suspect we won't. So,
it was reinstated, Rabbi Gamliel, though, wasn't it?
Yes, we're coming to that, Johnny.
Oh, okay.
Coming to that. So, you got the Gemarah on the screen there? Yeah, good. Okay, so this is what we said last week. How long will Rabban Gamliel continue afflicting him? Last year on Rosh Hashanah, he afflicted him, and that's what we're going to go back and learn shortly. But I want to just go on and just finish the story that we started last week. So we said we learned this piece of Gemarah, and they said, okay, we're removing him from the position of Nasi, but who should we put in his place? And they made various suggestions, as we said last week, maybe Rabbi Akiva. And we said, no, he's got no yichus because he comes from a family of converts, so that's no good. And then we said, well, maybe somebody else. And they said, no. And then they said, okay, what about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? And he's got all, as they say in the vernacular, alamilus. He's got all the possible advantages. He's wise, he's rich, and he's also got yichus. He's a 10th generation of descendants of Ezra. So they decided to make him, or to offer him at least, the position. This is where we got to last week. So they said, yeah, if he's rich, if he needs to pay homage, he can go and he can. He's got sufficient wealth to cover the costs of going to Caesar's court and taxes and gifts and everything. And he's also got yichus. He's a 10th generation of Ezra. So Rabban Gamliel will not be able to prompt him, as it were, because Rabban Gamliel was, of course, a descendant of Hillel. And of course, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, being a descendant of Ezra, could go head to head with him on yichus. Now, hang on, I just need to mute you all because there's a bit of feedback on my computer. Let me just do that, if I may, before I carry on. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, if you want to speak, just unmute yourself. Right, now we're over here. So they went, listen to this. This is really interesting. And I'm going to bring a little bit of a personal touch to that. They came and said to him, would the master consent to being the head of the yeshiva? This is what they said to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. They went and offered him the job of being the Nasi. And what do you think he said to them? He said to them, I will go and consult with my household. What does he mean by his household? He went and consulted with his wife. Okay, so he was not prepared to take the job unless his wife agreed. Now, when Rav Ido left, quite a number of people very kindly suggested that I might take over his position as Rav of our Kehillah, which I thought, well, I'll do it for the time being. Maybe I'll like it. Anyway, I did what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah did, and I went and consulted my household. And my household, being my wife, said, yeah, sure, you can take it if you want a divorce. So that was the end of that. So I said no, and those of you who will be in shul on Shabbat, give you a prior notice, I am going to make an announcement about that on Shabbat. And it is not that I am going to be the next rabbi of the shul, partly because I don't want a divorce. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah went and asked his wife, and look what she said to him. She said to him, "Oh, don't know about this," she says. "Not a job for a Yiddish boy, this. Perhaps they will remove you from office, just as they removed Rabban Gamliel." She says, "What do you want this for? You're asking for trouble. It's a difficult job. Maybe, sooner or later you'll upset them and they'll boot you out as well, like they've done that to Rabban Gamliel." And then he said to her, wise, remember he's only 18 years old, this Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, which shows you he got married rather young too, by the way. So he said to her, based on the folk saying, "Let a person use an expensive goblet one day and let it break tomorrow." In the Gemara, "Lishtamesh inash yom achada b'chasat demukra v'limcha litabei." Use it today and it will get broken tomorrow. In other words, one should take advantage of an opportunity that presents itself and don't worry if it's not going to last or not. In other words, grasp the opportunity when it presents itself. And so he said to her, "Well, I'm not worried about that they'll kick me out. So they'll kick me out. So what? I'll have done something good while I was the Nasi." But she wasn't done yet, Mrs. Elazar ben Azariah. She said to him, "Hang on a minute. You have no white hair. You're only 18 years old. How can it be that somebody so young can be the head of all these elderly zakenim, these elders, these sages?" And so the Gemara tells us this is the origin of that story that we spoke about last week, that you all knew from your Cheder days, learning about Seder night. Julia didn't know it, but she knows it now. That day he was 18 years old, and a miracle transpired for him, and 18 rows of hair turned white overnight. The Gemara comments, "This explains that which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said," and this is what we quote in the Haggadah every year. And Hare ani, here we are in the Hebrew, Hare ani ke ven shivim shana. I am like a man of 70 years old. Velo ben shivim shana. He doesn't say I am 70 years old. He says I am like, or as it translates here, I am as one who is 70 years old. I am like somebody who's 70 years old, not I am 70 years old, because he looked older than he actually was, because this miracle occurred and made him look older overnight, so that he would command the respect of his colleagues and not look like some little schnip who was sitting in the Nasi's seat. So having seen the miracle that occurred, Mrs. Elazar ben Azariah realized that she was a beaten woman, and that Rav Elazar ben Azariah had God on his side because he got this miracle that made him look old, and therefore her objection that he didn't look old enough was miraculously removed, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was made into the Nasi, and therefore here we go. It was taught
Johnny,
on that.
do you see any meaning to the 18 rows of hair? I would think that it was just in the front of his face, and that the rest of it went over his black hair, so he looked very distinguished.
Yes.
But what about the 18, the high? Was that a something that had meaning at that time or not? Do we know?
I think it was my reading of this, Sharon, was that he was 18 years old, and the 18 was one row for each year. But yeah, I mean, Chai is an important number, obviously, for us. I suspect it was then too, because those kind of alludings to various things was common and popular. So I read the 18 years, the 18 rows of hair being comparable to the 18 years old that he was. I'm trying to think about it now that you've mentioned it. If you say it was his first 18 rows, the rest of his hair would have been covered by his kippah. So it would have just been the front bit, maybe, that made him look. It doesn't say anything about his beard, does it, here? I always imagined that he had a long white beard as well. But actually, now that you point that out, it doesn't say anything about his beard. So maybe it was just his hair. The Gemarah says it was his hair. So let's just carry on. And this is an interesting expression here. I want to concentrate just on these three words. Tana, it was taught. Oto hayom, on that day. And often that expression, oto, meaning that particular day, oto hayom, oto ish, that man, it's a euphemism for something which is bad. Any Harry Potter fans amongst us here? Yes, we've got a nod there from Avril. Okay, well, those of you who are familiar with Harry Potter will know that the devil, the baddie, the Rosha in the Harry Potter story is a guy called Voldemort. In the early books, he's not referred to by name. People don't call him by his name. They call him he who cannot be named, or you know who, because they don't want to actually say his name, because it's not good. And I think that J.K. Rowling might well have taken that from our history, because that is what happens in Jewish history as well. We don't refer to the person whose birthday it is this coming Shabbat by name. People don't like to use the name Jesus Christ. Right, there you go, I said it. Jesus was his name. There's no problem calling him Jesus. The bit that they object to mostly is the word Christ, which is means savior, means the Mashiach. And so therefore, if you call him that, you are in effect calling him the Messiah, which we don't believe. So he is referred to in Jewish literature as, I'll say it in the Ashkenazi pronunciation because it has a better ring to it, as Oisoi Ish, or Oto Ish, that man, bit like Voldemort, who doesn't have a name, or at least we don't use his name. So Oto Ish, if you ever see something in Jewish literature referring to Oto Ish, it's that, it means that man, it means Jesus, because we don't refer to his name. And that's the same thing here. This was an inauspicious day. This Oto Yom was an inauspicious day. In some ways, it was an auspicious day, as David Marks alluded to last week, and we'll come to that in a little while. But the expression Oto Yom, generally speaking, it's an important and usually negative day. I remember going to see Johnny Halpern. You'll like this. I remember going to see Rav Schneebalg, who was the Dayan of the Machzikei Adat in Manchester. And I remember going to see him about something, and he referred to a particular person, whose name I will not mention, as Oisai Rosha, mi Water Park Road. That wicked person from Water Park Road, using that same expression, Oisai Rosha, he called him. I won't tell you who he was, but he wasn't popular with Dan Schneebalg, and he wasn't even prepared to say his name. He just called him Oisai Rosha, that wicked man. So that's the Oto Yom. I just wanted to point that out. So it was taught on that day. On the day that they removed Rabban Gamliel from his position and appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in his place, there was also a fundamental change in the general approach of the study hall. And we'll see why in a second. Basically, what happens here is what happened, well, the reverse in a way of what we read in this week's Parsha coming up. It's amazing how often you can find the connection. I think I've said this before in the shiur, in that one of my favorite psukim in the entire Torah, Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada et Yosef. And there arose a new king over Egypt. A new regime came in. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Things all changed, didn't it? Once this new king came in, everything changed for the worse. The Jews started to be enslaved, first of all with the taxes, and then physically. So here we have the opposite in a way. We have a new broom sweeping clean here. On the day that they removed, the very day that they removed Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah came in, they changed the whole approach to the study hall. And what happened? They dismissed the guard at the door, and permission was granted to the students to enter. Now, you have to know what had gone on here. Rabban Gamliel had made a very, as it says here, a selective approach. And all the students that wanted to come into the yeshiva to learn had to have an entrance exam first. They had to be screened, had to have an interview, or had to take a test. A bit like the test for, for the 11 plus to get into grammar school. They had to be screened. And if you didn't pass the test, you didn't get in. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had a completely different approach. He said, no, anybody that wants to come can come. Anybody who wants to learn, anybody who's willing to come and seek the opportunity to be educated should not be denied that opportunity. Let them come and let them learn. And he removed the guards from the door, and everybody could come. No entrance exam, no selection process. He allowed everybody to come in. Now, these are two different fundamental approaches here to education and to Judaism, really. And I think that, if you wanted to have a debate about that, I think there are positives and negatives on both sides of the argument. And of course, that's the best kind of argument that there is. The best kind of discussion is that where there are positives and negatives on both sides, and therefore one has to debate that and come up with a policy. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's policy was a much more literally open door policy. And as a result of that, many more students came into the study hall. And then the Gemara goes on to say, on that day, again, that same expression, but not in the negative way, hahu yoma. On that day, it doesn't say oisai yom on this day. On that day, several benches were added to the study hall to accommodate the numerous students. And so what happened there was that lots of people wanted to come in because previously they hadn't been allowed to come in. And of course, the interesting thing is that when you don't allow somebody to do something, they want to do it all the more, don't they? what would be interesting would be to see how many of those new students stood the test of time and carried on coming after a few weeks. It's a bit like when you start a new series of shiurim on tussle. You start off with quite a lot, and then only you lot, the hardcore, remain after a few weeks, and the rest of them drop off for one reason or another. So anyway, on that day, several benches were added to the study hall to accommodate the numerous students. And then there was a discussion of how many benches, 400 benches, 700 benches. Wow, you know, a lot. Now, this is really interesting now, and this shows the greatness of Rabban Gamliel. Remember, we've painted Rabban Gamliel in a rather negative light at the moment. You know, he's a strict man. He's not letting people come in. He humiliated Rabbi Yehoshua. You know, you would be forgiven at the moment for saying that Rabban Gamliel was not the greatest, but he was the greatest. He was a great person. And we're going to see a little bit of his greatness now. Most people, I think, who would be deposed from a position and had their policy completely upturned, completely reversed, would feel aggrieved, would want to have a go at their successor, would be looking for fault, would be trying to show that actually their policy was better. We've seen that many times, haven't we, in politics and wherever there is leadership. This is what happens. Not with Rabban Gamliel. Look what Rabban Gamliel said. Rabban Gamliel was disheartened. Well, you could understand him being disheartened. He's been booted, and everything that he stood for has been upturned. But he's not disheartened because of that. He said to himself, perhaps, heaven forbid, I prevented Israel from engaging in Torah study. Maybe I was wrong, he says. Wow, that's incredible humility from Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi, the one who is strict, the one who is so strict that he's willing to push his point to the degree that he's willing to make his colleagues suffer, and yet he's willing to consider that maybe he was wrong. And that is, if anything, the greatest trait that you can find in a leader. It's absolutely sorely missing in the modern world, if you ask me. I can't remember the last time I ever heard a political leader saying, I was wrong. They always say, no, you are wrong. You have misunderstood. It wasn't a party. It was a working episode. No. All that music and things, that was just the radio. You're wrong. I'm right. You're wrong. No, we don't see that today. We don't see Rabban Gamliel's humility. We don't see Rabban Gamliel's thought processes, that actually what he was there for was for the benefit of the people. And he thinks now, hang on a minute, maybe my policy was wrong. God forbid, I've actually prevented the thing that I wanted the most, which was to teach Torah. And so they showed him in his dream. I'm not sure who they is, and presumably, you know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a dream. White jugs filled with ashes. And the translation here, the commentary here says, alluding to the fact that the additional students were worthless idlers. So in other words, it didn't, you know, you weren't wrong, Rabban Gamliel. These extra students that came in, these 700 benches worth or 400 benches worth of students there, they weren't up to scratch. They didn't stay there. They didn't stay the course. And then the Gemarah says, actually, that isn't true. They weren't worthless idlers, but that dream was shown to him to ease his mind so that he wouldn't feel bad. So here you see this crazy story here, a crazy story. Rabban Gamliel, really strict, has a very strict selection policy. You know, very difficult exam to get into the school, to get into the yeshiva. New fellow comes along, reverses the policy. Rabban Gamliel says, "Oy vey, maybe I was wrong, and I've prevented people from learning." And HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to make him feel bad, so he shows him a dream which isn't even true. It's really, the whole thing is it's sort of a bit of a pendulum back and forth. But it's a very interesting Gemarah, this, and I wanted to share it with you. Now, this is what David Marks was telling us last week. It was taught, there is a tradition that the tractate Ediot, which David quoted from in his presentation last week, was taught on that day. It's called Bo Bayom, on that day. It is referring to that day. So on that day, what it means is the day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took over, there were so many students going on there. They got so much done that they taught every halacha that there was in Ediot. And there was no halacha whose ruling was pending in the study hall that they did not explain. They absolutely went to town on that day. They really had a fantastic working day. Halachot were decided there and then. And here's another greatness of Rabban Gamliel. Even Rabban Gamliel did not avoid the study hall for even one moment, as he held no grudge against those who removed him from office, and he participated in the halachic discourse in the study hall as one of the sages. So here he was, the great Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi, the strict leader, the guy who had ruled with a rod of iron. And now he's sitting in the audience learning from a chap who's 18 years old and with no grudge against him whatsoever. And I think that demonstrates to us the greatness of Rabban Gamliel. By the way, Rabban, as opposed to Rabbi, Rabban Gamliel is the title given to the Nasi, to the president. So there was Rabban Gamliel. His son was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and he was a great man, Rabban Gamliel. We can see that whether his policies, you agree with his policies, you don't agree with his policies, they were done with the correct kavanah, and he didn't try and rationalize them and justify them as most people would do when they were deposed. He didn't throw his toys out the pram and not come to the study hall. He came as a student and was willing to learn from other people, and that shows the greatness of it. And then we've got the Gemarah goes on to tell us. I'm not going to go into this now, but the Gemarah then goes on to say how what happened was that Rabban Gamliel went to Rabbi Yehoshua, who is the one that he had humiliated, and he asked for his forgiveness. He asked for his forgiveness. And after a bit of toing and froing, I'm not going to go into it now. If you want to look it up, it's in Brachot 28a. After a bit of toing and froing, Rabbi Yehoshua forgives Rabban Gamliel, and then the sages say, okay, well, in that case, Rabban Gamliel is now, as it were, learned his lesson, if you like. He now understands that he can't treat people like he did. He really is the greatest of our scholars. We need to reinstate him. So then they've got a problem, haven't they? What do they do with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Right? You now want to reinstate Rabban Gamliel. Well, you've got Rabban, he's not done anything wrong. In fact, he demonstrated his greatness, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So what are you going to do? So what do you think they did? I'm not going to show you the Gemarah there. What do you think they did? Anybody want to suggest a solution to the conundrum of what they're now going to do with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, because they want to reinstate Rabban Gamliel? Julia, we can't hear you. Unmute, Julia, and tell us your idea.
I think he should be made head of social studies and social coordinator, seeing he seems to have a very personable approach. So they should delegate.
He'll be moved sideways to the Home Office. Yeah. Okay, that's one solution. Anybody else got a solution? Okay, let me give you a clue. Ein chadash tachat hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. Avril, you're mouthing something. Come on, give us your idea. What would you do?
I was only translating what you said.
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry.
Anyone?
I would have said that Rabbi, what's his name, Ben Azariah, went back to his wife and asked her what to do.
Well, I don't think she got a choice in this. This was the sages making a decision, but that would have been a good idea. Yeah, actually, I think we should have made her the head of the Sanhedrin. That's my view. She was obviously a very wise woman. Okay, I will tell you what they did. Well, I'll tell you what they suggested for a start. What they suggested was an alternate prime minister, a bit like we have now, a rotation. Some of the time, Rabban Gamliel would be the Nasi, and some of the time, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would be the Nasi. Obvious, innit? So you would have an alternate prime minister. So that's what they suggested, that they would have 1 week, Rabban Gamliel would give the drasha in shul, and 1 week, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would give the drasha in shul. That was the suggestion. But for one reason or another, that's not what happened. In fact, what happened was a similar thing. There was a rotation, but Rabban Gamliel was reinstated as the Nasi. But in order not to, that people should not think that there was something wrong with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, once in 4 weeks, once a month, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah gave the main Nasi's drasha to show that he was in fact fitting for that post, but Rabban Gamliel was reinstated. So that was the solution. Yes, Julia.
I just wanted to ask, well, on what basis did they continue? For instance, I mean, it's so interesting, the debate about letting people in without determining their level of knowledge or their level of compliance, and or letting in people generally. And on what basis did they continue? Couldn't we have a debate on that? Which is better?
Okay.
And the pros and cons.
All right. Okay. Let's put that on the agenda. Let's arrange a debate. You and I, Julia, will arrange a debate, Leenader, on that topic somehow or other. I agree. That's a fascinating topic. On what basis did they continue? I'm pretty certain that they would. I don't know. Maybe David Marks knows, because he probably has read this Gemarah in more detail than me. I am guessing that what they would have done is to carry on the basis of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's approach to allow everybody in. And I'm pretty certain that in the this sounds a bit weird that I say I'm pretty certain, and I was about to say in the dark recesses of my mind, I recall something. So I'm not pretty certain about it at all. I seem to recall that actually the guards did not go back on the doors, and I think it was open door policy. David, can you help me out on that? Am I right?
You are correct. Just to answer Julia's question, Rabban Gamliel reflected the much earlier views, the exclusive views of Bet Shammai. Remember the story of Hillel sitting on the outside in the snow because he can't get into the lectures of Bet Shammai. It was very exclusive. It was the Harvard, it was the Oxbridge of its time, and reflected, if you like in today's parlance, a very right-wing view. Whereas Bet Hillel's view was much more inclusive. And that was the real significance of this Bo Bayom, what happened on that day. That there was a massive transformation in the yeshiva, away from the exclusivity of Bet Shammai, and hence the bringing in of additional benches to allow all students, i.e. the students who followed Hillel's more lenient approach, to have a say in the Bet Midrash.
Yeah, we if you remember, we mentioned, I don't know if you were with us last week, Julia, but we mentioned last week that there was a little bit of an anomaly, because Rabban Gamliel was in fact a direct descendant of Hillel, and yet he took the approach of Shammai, and we mentioned that last week. Really, it's sort of almost in passing, but that's really what makes this whole thing so fascinating, is that Rabban Gamliel was clearly a very strong individual who was willing to go against his own heritage, if you like. He felt so strongly about it. And yet, despite that strength of feeling, he was not averse to listening to somebody else's view and to consider that he might have been wrong. Leon first, and then Sharon or Larry, whichever it is. Leon.
Is there not a parallel here with Joseph, who forgave his brothers and said their behavior was instrumental in his being appointed, or going to Egypt and being appointed second in command, so to speak? The whole idea was that God had this in mind, and here you've got the same result. You've got Rabban Gamliel being thrown out for the purpose of Rabbi Azariah coming in and resulting in another 700 benches and students for them starting to study Torah.
That's a nice idea. I hadn't thought of that parallel, but I think it works, doesn't it? Because, and in fact, what's very interesting about what you just said is that if you look in the Chumash itself, Joseph, at that point, forgiving his brothers and saying it wasn't you, it was God's plan, as you've just said, is the first recorded event of forgiveness in the Torah. It's the first time a human being forgives another human being. Rabbi Sachs writes about this very beautifully on that particular point. That at that point, forgiveness was born, as it were. So what you're saying, Leon, is that in order for progress to be made at that point, Rabban Gamliel had to be set aside for a period of time and then brought back in a similar way that Joseph was set aside and sent away and then came back as the leader again. I can see the parallel. I like it very much. Excellent. Sharon, Larry, we can't see you. But...
Yes, okay. It's actually at this time of the morning, it's better that way. I think that there's more than an apology done here. I think this is one of the most profound. I spent some time in Brachot, and this was one of the most profound stories I ever encountered. And as you recall, I mentioned that Yehoshua was a blacksmith. He was humble. And we're talking about two princes here. We're talking about, Ben Azariah and Gamliel, both who are from these fancy schmancy, wealthy, erudite families. And the very next story is, I think it goes much deeper than Joseph, because it doesn't blame it on God. It blames it on the fact that Gamliel had no idea at what cost other scholars and great people studied and devoted themselves to the governance of the Jewish people at this very, very liminal and narrow time. And what Gamliel actually said, I insulted you, forgive me, I was wrong. And then he's suitable to go back and retake his position. I think that the reason that they kept Elazar ben Azariah on was also, I think it was a reminder to the entire group, whether there were 400 plus or 800, whatever there were, of this incident, so that they would never forget, and so that they would know that the cross-fertilization of ideas, approaches, and ages was a very important ingredient to governance and decision-making.
And I was going to add, to bring it to current times, that it was like making, one way of doing this was to make Gamliel, instead of the CEO, the chairman of the board, so that you could have new blood, a new CEO, and yet there would be someone to also, for him to consult with as well, and to perhaps temper his lack of experience and brightness with someone who could be both a mentor and advisor to him.
Thank you. Fascinating. It's a fascinating topic, this. Let's just have a look at the Gemarah here, which is what Sharon was referring to. I wasn't going to go into this in detail because I still want to tell you the story about the Rosh Hashanah, which we need to go back to in 24A and 24B and 25A, and we're almost out of time already. So I will, but I do think this is worth going to show you the Gemarah, which Sharon has just quoted. So when he got kicked out, he realized that something had gone wrong. So he went to go and appease Rabbi Yehoshua. When he got to Rabbi Yeshua's house, he saw that the walls of his house were black. And Rabban Gamliel said to Rabbi Yehoshua in wonderment, "From the walls of your house, it's apparent that you are a blacksmith." As until then, he had no idea that Rabbi Yehoshua was forced to engage in that arduous trade in order to make a living. Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, "Woe unto a generation that you are its leader, as you are unaware of the difficulties of Torah scholars, how they make a living and how they feed themselves." This is the Marie Antoinette moment. Let them eat cake, right? Rabban Gamliel had no idea, as Sharon just said, that it was so difficult and what tremendous sacrifices people made. He was rich. He was from a wealthy, fancy family with yichus, and he didn't have to worry. But Rabbi Yehoshua, in order to be able to go and sit and learn, there was no stipends from the yeshiva in those days. He didn't know koilel avreichim's pay. He had to make a living. And this, by the way, is another support for those people like Natan Slifkin, for example, who are very vociferously opposed to the koilel system, that Torah scholars should be going out there and making a living and not relying on others to support them. But that's another issue we won't go into. So here, Rabbi Yehoshua gives it him back and says, "Woe unto a generation that you are its leader." A leader needs to know what's going on with its people, and you don't, and that's bad. And then Rabban Gamliel then asked for his forgiveness, etc. So yeah, I agree that this is a fascinating topic. Larry's point about the chairman of the company, I suppose that's the idea of being kicked upstairs into a senior management role. I understand from what you said, Larry, that means that the chairman of the company has less of a day-to-day control than the CEO, and it's sometimes a position given to somebody who they want to keep on, as it were, but is perhaps not suitable to be the CEO. Would that be about right?
Yes, I think so, but you still may want his experience from over time in the operation of the business, but not making the day-to-day decisions and major judgments.
Okay, I now understand why I was made the chairman of Tchelet, and not the CEO. Okay, right. I'll have to have words with Ravi Doe about that. Never mind. We digress. Right. Let's spend the last 10 minutes going back to this Gemarah here.
Johnny.
Yes, David.
So can I just bring in a connection to what you've just learned? Back to our Gemarah in Sanhedrin, so at least we get some Sanhedrin today. We just learned that on Bo Bayom, the Masechet Eduyot was composed. And remember last week I quoted from chapter 7, Mishnah 7. The continuation of that Mishnah was that it was testified on that day, Bo Bayom, that henceforward, when it came to intercalating the years, if the Nasi was away for whatever reason during Adar, that the Sanhedrin were allowed to make the ruling of the intercalation subject to the Nasi's ratification when he got back. So prior to Bo Bayom, it was the Nasi on his own. And because of this new policy, From that day onwards, the Sanhedrin could make the decision, providing it was ratified. And the Mishnah there continues with the story that we learned a few weeks ago about how Rabban Gamliel was away in Syria on business. That's quoted verbatim in the Mishnah in Eduyot. And it was on that basis that the Sanhedrin made the decision in his absence.
That's really interesting, isn't it? But one wonders how it actually worked. What if he didn't come back before the end of Adar?
I assume
do we assume that he's ratified it then? Because that seems
I would
to be...
assume that he sent a message back to base in Yavne.
Okay, so in other words, there has to be a ratification before the end of Adar. That's the absolute last possible time. Yeah, okay, really interesting. Thank you for that. Let's spend the last few minutes looking at Rosh Hashanah 24b and 24 and 25a. And this is the famous Gemarah that we were talking about before. There's a Mishnah that says, there was an incident in which two witnesses came to testify about the new moon, and they said, we saw the waning moon in the morning in the east, and that same day we saw the new moon in the evening in the west. Strange thing. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, nah, they're false witnesses. It's impossible to see a new moon so soon after the last sighting of the waning moon. However, when they arrived in Yavne, Rabban Gamliel accepted them as witnesses without concern. And then there was another incident in which two witnesses came and said, we saw the new moon at its anticipated time, i.e. on the night of the 30th day of the previous month. However, on the following night, the start of the 31st, okay, it wasn't seen. Well, how can that be? But nevertheless, Rabban Gamliel accepted their testimony and established the new moon on the 30th day, not the 31st, okay? Now, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkan said, nah, that can't be right. You can't, how can witnesses testify that a woman gave birth and the next day she's still pregnant? Can't be. If the new moon is there, you can't be that you can't see it the next day. And Rabbi Yehoshua agreed with him. This is the same Rabbi Yehoshua that we were talking about, who's the blacksmith, who we're talking about in our Gemarah Brachot. Okay, so Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, I agree with you. The new moon should be the following day. In other words, not on the 30th day of the month, but the 31st. In other words, it will be a intercalated month. So this is obviously prior to our Rabban Gamliel getting booted out. Upon hearing Rabbi Yeshua's challenging his ruling, Rabban Gamliel sent a message to him and said, I decree against you that you must appear before me with your staff and your money on the day on which Yom Kippur occurs according to your calculation, which according to my calculation is the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur. So in other words, I command you to break Yom Kippur as you see it in order to show that you abide by my ruling. This was the episode that our Gemarah in Brachot 28a referred to when it said he humiliated him at Rosh Hashanah. Where is it? Over here. Here. How long will Rabban Gamliel continue afflicting him? Last year on Rosh Hashanah he afflicted him. That is what he's talking about here. This Gemarah here in Rosh Hashanah 25a is the episode that Gemarah is referring to. He decreed that Rabbi Yehoshua had to come along on the day that he, Rabbi Yehoshua, thought was Yom Kippur, with his staff and his money, in other words, to break Yom Kippur. So what did he do? Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Akiva was a contemporary of them both. Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yehoshua, distressed that he was forcing him, the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. In an attempt to console him, Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yehoshua, I can learn from a verse that everything that Rabban Gamliel did in sanctifying the month is done, whether you agree or not. That's the way it is. And he quotes the pasuk in Sefer Vayikra, which says, these are the appointed seasons, Eile Moadei Adonai, Asher Tikru'u Otam, which you shall proclaim them, B'moadam, in their season. We say it's part of the Kiddush, isn't it, on Yom Tov morning, Eile Moadei Hashem, Asher Tikru'u Otam, which you, this is Hashem speaking, these are the days which you will proclaim. Once the Bet Din, the Sanhedrin, has proclaimed it, that is Yom Tov, whether it's right or it's wrong. Doesn't matter whether it's a new moon, which should have been or shouldn't have been. Whatever day the Sanhedrin say is Yom Kippur or is Rosh Chodesh, and therefore 10 days later or 9 days later is Yom Kippur, that is it. Makes no difference whether he was right or he was wrong. Once it's done, it's done. And this verse indicates that whether you have proclaimed at their proper time or whether you've declared them not at the proper time, I have only these festivals as established by the representative of the Jewish people. Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Yehoshua, you may or you may not be right. It doesn't matter. Once Rabban Gamliel has stated that this is the day of Rosh Chodesh, i.e. Rosh Hashanah, it then follows that the 10th of the month is Yom Kippur, whether you agree or not. And so, as a result of that, Rabbi Yehoshua came along with his money and his staff to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred according to his calculation. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on the head. And he said to him, come in peace, my teacher and my student. How can you be a teacher and a student? He says, you are my teacher in wisdom, as Rabbi Yehoshua was wiser than anyone else in his generation. And you are my student as you accepted my statement despite your disagreement. So that's the famous story of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua with Yom Kippur. And it certainly, I think, has a bearing on the matter that we discussed a few weeks ago when I raised the issue of the island of Samoa, where the day of Shabbat changed. I asked a question whether Shabbat was a day which was fixed, i.e. 7 days or multiples of 7 days after the first ever Shabbat at the creation of the world. And if we got it wrong, we've been keeping Shabbat on the wrong day forever, or from whenever we got it wrong, or whether Shabbat is when we say it is. And somebody mentioned, I think it was you, Johnny, mentioned the story that Rav Ido spoke about when they tried to make Shabbat on a Tuesday in the yeshiva and it didn't work. Well, it didn't work because he knew it wasn't really Shabbat, but had they really thought it was Shabbat, it would have worked. And I think this tells us here, Eile Moadei Adonai Asher Tikru'u Otam B'moadam. This is, it's up to us. It's what we make of it. Shabbat is what we make of it. Yom Tov is what we make of it. This is very, very clear. It's not for God, it's for us. That's the whole point of it. It's Asher Tikru'u Otam B'moadam. And I think that's a good place to stop there. And then hopefully next week we will get back to Sanhedrin as opposed to Brachot and Rosh Hashanah, but nevertheless it was still a Gemarah shiur. So any questions, any comments?
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
And refuah shlema to Leon.
Yes, refuah shlema to Leon. We want you back in full voice for Sunday, please, Leon. Okay. Don't forget Shabbat, Dvar and Dvash and Christmas and the Jews. I'll send out the flyers as well. See you all soon. Shavuot tov.
Shavuot tov, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.
Bye.